development. And Mark, I'd like to ask you, how does all this look from NATO's perspective? What is the situation on the ground? What are the potential developments?
Well, you'll have seen last night the US State Department put out a statement that they're seeing several things. They're seeing an increase in air defense systems. They're seeing an increase in the Russian troops on the border, and that they've seen a dramatic increase in training. I think probably people who just read the newspapers and go onto the social media and the news media will have seen all of those elements highlighted. So what there's been a consistent pattern of is that despite the Minsk agreements, that there have been more tanks, more armored vehicles, more artillery, a very large increase in training. And what you're seeing is the Russians, I believe, are trying to switch away from, as far as they can, from doing direct support.
Mark, your microphone is too low.
Okay. Try that. Okay. How does that sound?
Is that better? Good.
Okay.
Go on.
Yeah, even I can hear me now. Yeah, so to briefly recap, as the State Department put out last night, we've seen an increase in Russian air defense systems. We've seen more training. We've seen an increase in troops on the border. And all of those things have been highlighted. And as I say, if you look in, some of the best sources you get are people on the ground. There's some very dramatic BBC stories today. What does all this mean? I think what it's indicating is that the Russians, ever since the Minsk II agreement are doing, is they're trying to switch the balance from doing direct support, where they're having to do the fighting, in order that the separatists can do the fighting. So they're giving them better equipment, and it's almost laughable now that the Russians are always saying that all of the equipment the separatists have, they got from the Ukrainians. But if you look at the Ukrainian equipment, you look at the Russian equipment, all the Russian equipment's much better, So somehow all the shiny tanks were taken by the separatists, and all the old tatty ones were left with the Ukrainians. They have given them a huge number of high-end equipment, and they're teaching them how to use them so that they don't have to be quite so overt. If you look at the pattern over the last year, the separatists have never really been able to achieve very much on their own. So they tried to take Donetsk airport, they couldn't. So in came some Russians, they took the airport, and then they left again. The same thing with the Debaltseve pocket. They've been banging away at that for months. They didn't achieve it. They had signed up to Minsk II. They needed some quick action. So what did they do? They sent in some Russians to a lot of artillery, a lot of tanks, really hit it hard, and then got out. And that's the pattern. But they'd rather not be visible, because the strategy that they're looking at is multi-pronged. They do not want economic sanctions from the EU. So what they're looking to do, and what the separatists are looking to do, is to push the boundaries of the Minsk II agreement to their benefit, but without triggering an EU sanctions reaction. So they calculated that they could abuse the agreement to take Debaltseve. And they calculated right. So what are they calculating now? I don't think they'll be able to take Mariupol without the EU reacting. So my guess, this is just Mark Laity, not official intelligence, I don't think they're going to go for Mariupol, not because they don't want it, but because that will be a step too far. But there's other bits that they could go for. They do not want an independent eastern Ukraine. They do not want Novorossiya, because as our colleague said, strategically they want it to be the Trojan horse that influences Ukraine. On the other hand, the separatists do want an independent state. So there's a tension there. So people like Sakharenko, they want independence. They want to be a client state, but the Russians don't, because eastern Ukraine is much more useful to them strategically to be able to undermine Ukraine. So an independent eastern Ukraine is no use to them. So that's where they are. They're trying to shift that away so that they can gradually erode the consensus on sanctions. And in the end, they have been quite successful. If you look at the things that they have done against Minsk II, they've got away with it. There is a significant number of tanks and other armored vehicles have moved in there since Minsk II. What have the consequences been? Zero. So why would they stop? If you get away with it, you keep on doing it. And that's the tactic. Bite and hold, see what you can get away with. And I imagine we've got people from almost every European nation here. There is more tanks in the separatist enclave than most of your armies have got. They've got 200 plus tanks. So most of your nations have got fewer tanks than they've got on their own. So that's pretty significant to think about.
So what are we going to do about all this?
Well, I mean, I'm not a politician. The point is that there is a strategy, and I'm also speaking on my behalf, not NATO's, as you might gather. The thing is that the Russians have a strategy here. They have decided, as has been put in their grand strategic sense, is they have decided they want to maintain or regain influence on their near abroad. So now, and the Ukraine, as they regard as in their sphere of interest, and as we said at the beginning, that breaches the Helsinki principles. But that's what they have decided. So they have the strategy that they do not want Ukraine to slip away because they think it's in their sphere of interest. And the EU, NATO, other nations, they have decided, in line with Helsinki, that Ukraine should decide for itself. The issue is, how much are people prepared to do about it? And that's the issue. It's the what's at stake is pretty clear. The issue is, how much do you care? And what do you want to do for it? And what they are also doing. And the thing with the Russians, you asked me a military question, Roland, but the Russians don't do military. They do hybrid. They mix together, another term, DIME, diplomatic, informational, military, economic. They're doing all four together. So they're not just supplying tanks. They are also putting economic pressure on. You've seen recently, over the last 2 weeks, Google are now being zapped by the EU for being overmighty. Gazprom are being zapped. But there's a difference. Google just want to make money. Gazprom are an organ of state power. And I don't want to say power, I don't mean gas. They want to make money, but they are officially a part. Their prices are set by the Kremlin, not the market. So they are being used quite openly, quite consciously, as a method of projecting Russian power. So when you talk about what the Russians are doing, don't talk military, because that's just one element.
Is the third phase coming, Mark? Is Putin trying to prove that NATO is a paper tiger by attacking a NATO country? Hybridly, maybe?
Well, you'd have to ask Putin that. Would our colleagues in Latvia and Estonia definitely feel that there is a risk of him trying to undermine them through the same hybrid methods or variants on the existing hybrid methods? And therefore, we have launched the assurance measures precisely because we believe that there is that potential for a hybrid threat against that. Article 5 is firm. My view, the view of our leaderships, is that Russia does not want to break Article 5 because they know that that brings unknowable consequences. But would they like to do something that says, has Article 5 been breached? In other words, as they did in Ukraine in different ways, create confusion, doubt, cause doubt, and therefore achieve advantage. And that's why we've been looking at all our assurance measures, ramping up exercises, revising our structures, precisely because we need to adapt to what we see as this hybrid challenge. So clearly, if there was any kind of attack on Estonia and Latvia, that would be a breach of Article 5. There would be a response. But you have to say an attack has happened. And clearly we have seen that the Russians have this tactic of sowing doubt, confusion, doing things by the back door. So one has to guard against that. And can I say, because this came out of previous debate about the French general's evidence, what we were told was a gross distortion of what he said. A gross distortion. What he said was that he did not believe that an interpretation of Russian potential was correct. He's referring to a specific occasion when Sakir said he believed that the Russians had the capability of going to Crimea and beyond. Sakir never said they would. He highlighted the possibility. The French general said they did not believe that was going to happen. Ergo, fine. But when you hear this, and I bring it up because we've had it before, and it's important, because we are credible and the Russians are not, and the Russians are attacking our credibility every day because they know it's our weapon and one they don't have. The intelligence that we use is fused. It is not American intelligence, it's not British intelligence, it's NATO intelligence. It is taken from all nations. Now, I can't tell you what I hear, because clearly I'd be breaking all sorts of secrets. But what I can tell you is nothing I have heard privately contradicts what you have heard publicly. You haven't heard all what I've heard privately, but you are not being told things which are contradicted by what we hear privately. And you are not hearing an American song. You are hearing the intelligence of a lot of nations, and also track it across to the open source. One of the very best stories, which contradicts so much of what we hear, AP story a couple of weeks back, tracking the training regime that the Russians were doing. Look at all the stuff. The website Bellingcat, tracking where all the artillery was fired from. All this is open source. The open source evidence of what the Russians have done is overwhelming. You don't even need an intelligence service anymore, frankly. It is all there. Look and you will see. And the same thing with Minsk 2, a gross misinterpretation. We are not breaking the Minsk agreement. And for you to say that when there are hundreds of Russian-supplied tanks in eastern Ukraine, when there have been thousands of Russians have gone in there and fought Ukrainians, for you to say that, yes, you're very funny, but I'm not laughing.